Welcome back to Too Young to Grieve, and today I'm joined by Jack. Jack experienced grief at a young age, like many of us have, and ever since has been sharing really honest daily reflections about grief, love, and what it means to just keep living after loss. Jack is also a writer, so a lot of his work has helped so many people with brilliant words feel less alone in their grief journey. And I'm so thankful that he is here joining me today to share even more perspectives. So thank you once again, Jack, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Luke. I'm so grateful to be here, and thank you for the kind introduction. I'm a fan of the work you're doing too, and I know how many people it's helping, and it's very inspiring.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that so much. And like I say, the work that you're doing, the way that you articulate your words and the thoughts on grief, I think helps so many people. And I think the episode today, again, is just going to expand on that and just explain how we navigate grief, what goes on in our mind, our body, and I can't wait to hear some of your perspectives on everything. But I would like to dive into things a bit lighter before we dive into stuff. So I was looking at your pages and I see that you travel quite a lot, and we briefly spoke about before your love for traveling. So what is one of your favorite places that you have been to so far?
You will like this answer. I think London has been my favorite place.
Interesting.
I've been fortunate to visit a few times. One of my best friends moved there last year. So I've already been to visit her twice, and I just love it. It's funny because it reminds me of New York in some ways because it's a big city, but it has so much history, and I just find the people to be so friendly, and it has such a great energy. So I have to say, I think London is my favorite place to go. I'm jealous that you're living there.
See, as someone from London, I would not say you should be jealous about that. But it's so
Sure.
interesting to hear that out of all the places, London is the one. So that is interesting. You must have come when it wasn't raining. That's all I can say. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting place. I give you that. And if someone listening, needed somewhere to go just to reset their head for a few days, maybe, wanted to connect with someone a bit more on a deeper level, out of the places that you've been to, where would you say is like a good place to do that?
Right. That's a great question. I think, if you're in the United States, for me, shortly after my loss, kind of when I needed a reset because I'm based in New York, I went out to Montauk, which is in the Hamptons. And it's a beach town. And I think just being by the ocean, anywhere you can go and be by the water, I find it so therapeutic and calming. So I really think there's something about being near an ocean when you're trying to grieve
Yeah,
or work through something that is just very calming and soothing. So I'd say anywhere near the water.
yeah.
That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because I think when we are going through grief, it kind of, everyone has a different location that might be special to them. So, that question is just sort of broad, but also at the same time, it's a brilliant answer because it shows that, when you're in nature, when you're surrounded by oceans or whether it's a forest, whatever it is, that people like to do hiking, swimming, whatever it is,
Right.
that nature aspect definitely does help you on your grief journey, I think. Do you feel like traveling and being outside and being in nature, is that something that has helped you quite a lot on your grief journey, would you say?
Absolutely. And it's interesting what I found when I the first time I visited a new city, a new place after losing my late partner, there was a sadness because I felt sad that I couldn't share it with him. And then that feeling kind of changed over time. And I embraced the idea that he was seeing it through my eyes and that he was with me. And there's something about being in nature that just makes me feel connected to him in a deeper way.
Mm,
Um, and I do really believe that wherever I am, he's with me and he's experiencing it. So that's something I've chosen to embrace. And I almost feel as if when I'm traveling, I'm bringing him with me to these new places. So yeah, so it's funny how traveling can be hard to do without the person that you used to travel with. And yet, at the same time, it can also make you feel more connected to them. So that's something that it's this contradiction that I have found. Um, but overall, I have found it very helpful to go to new places and explore new things. And I feel like I want to live more and I want to see more, because I have this new appreciation and understanding for how, fleeting life is. So I do think that's something that's driven me to say yes to more trips and to make the time, make the commitment, the monetary commitment to make travel a focus of my life. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's such a big thing for people to sort of take on board that, not necessarily the travel or going to a whole new country, or you can travel within your own country and go for a weekend away or whatever it is. But the key point that I took from that was, that as much as it's brilliant that you're seeing new places, you're still grieving, but that grief and that joy and that newfound perspective of, yeah, I wish that they could see it, but also at the same time they still are through my eyes and through my, newfound lease of life. So I think that's a brilliant thing and perspective to share, because it kind of goes with that grief and joy can coexist, saying that a lot of people like to touch upon, which is tough to hear at the start of your journey, of course, but it just shows that hope that you can do that. So just you touched upon it briefly, but Jack, would you just be able to share a bit about yourself and your story for people who haven't come across yourself yet?
Absolutely. So my name is Jack. I live in New York City. And when I was 23 years old, I was set up through a mutual friend with a guy whose name was also Jack. And we went on one date, and that's all it took. And we ended up spending 7 amazing years together. And we got engaged in September of 2022. And unfortunately, 3 months later, as we were beginning to plan our wedding, he passed away suddenly on Christmas Eve. We later learned that he had a heart condition, that he, didn't know about. And so I was 2 weeks away from my 30th birthday, and I felt like my whole world fell apart.
Mm,
I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with Jack, and we were planning a future together. And suddenly my world was turned upside down, and I had never experienced a grief like this. I never expected that I would lose him. I thought often about losing my parents. I think, as many of us do, and I know your story. But it's there's that's the natural order of things in a way.
mhm,
Um, this was just so unexpected and shocking, and so I think that was the hardest part for me. Has been accepting this new reality. Um,
mhm.
so I kind of yeah, so it's been terrible.
Yeah.
It's been terrible, but I would say, you know, um, I started sharing my story last year. So after it had been 2 years since he passed, when I decided to start posting online and sharing
Mhm,
about him, I wanted to share him with the world, and I felt like I had something to say about grief and grieving, because I think my big takeaway over the last few years was just none of us are prepared. No one knows what it feels like until you lose someone you love.
mhm,
And and so many of my friends wanted to be there for me, but didn't know how. And I was lucky to have a very supportive community of friends and family who've lifted me through this, but we've all kind of been learning together as we go. And so I just felt like, you know what, I've got some insight now that I can share with other people to
mhm,
hopefully better prepare them for a loss, or help them through the early days of their loss, or help friends and family who are trying to, support someone who's grieving. So I'm so glad I started sharing online, because it's connected me to so many amazing people, such as yourself. And I think that's been the best part of all, is speaking with other people who have lost someone they love.
mhm,
And it's truly made me feel less alone in my grief. And there's such a beautiful community on TikTok and Instagram of people that are grieving. And I who would have thought that social media of all places could be this beautiful light that helps so many people. And it's evident in your page. The work that you're doing is helping so many people, and I'm so inspired by it. And so it's been an amazing journey so far. Um, and yeah, but I'm still, 3 years from my loss, and
Hmm.
I'm still figuring it out,
Yeah.
Um, the grief isn't as heavy day to day, but it's still there, and I'm still learning how to navigate it. So I'm still a work in progress, and yeah, that's kind of my story to this point.
No, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it's not easy to ever, share it and go back to it and think about it. But also at the same time, like you said, even when you talk about it on social media with other people who get it, it kind of takes that weight off your shoulders as well, talking about it. And it does make you feel a bit lighter sometimes, as much as people might look at yourself and myself sharing it online. Like, how can you talk about something so, negative and this and that? And it's that feeling, like you said, that by sharing, we know that someone else is going to feel less alone in their journey. Someone might understand you a bit more. Like you said, your friends might understand how you're feeling a bit more and be able to support you better. But just allowing people to know that, yeah, what you're feeling is very normal and I'm going through it too, will resonate with so many people. So, again, thank you for sharing your story. And I think a lot of people clearly have taken a lot from it. So I really do appreciate that. You touched upon loads of things and we'll dive into those, but you did mention that and I completely agree. It's a very unique and shocking, you said, type of loss. Like we said, there's all types of loss, there's all types of griefs, and there's no one that's, stronger or hurts more than another, but there are different types. So what for you felt most unique or shocking about the loss of a fiance, would you say?
I think the part that was most shocking was just it was something I never expected to happen. You hear about tragedies happening to other people, but you never think it's going to happen to you. And I I I just never thought this would happen. It had never crossed my radar. And I will say though, and you just said it beautifully, all grief is terrible. And even if it's a loss that you're expecting, I still have found that when it comes, you're not ready. So I do think that no matter the loss, there is still going to be, an element of shock to it and surprise. So, you can't compare loss. It's all terrible when you lose someone you love. But yeah, but I think this just felt so wrong. I felt so sad for him. He was only 30 years old. He had so much life left to live, that he deserved to live. And then there was also guilt involved, being, the one left behind. I felt guilty that I get to go live my life and continue to grow and learn. And so I felt a lot of guilt. And I think that was the first hurdle I had to get over was guilt. So navigating that while being in shock, I think that was the hardest part at the beginning.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you say, like we touched upon a couple of times, yeah, all grief is terrible, but there are just differences between them. And it's interesting to hear your perspective on this. And like I say, I think a lot of people who have lost a partner, fiance, will relate to yourself so much and relate to that guilt that you mentioned as well. And in regards to that guilt, how do you've obviously 3 years into this, it's no, it's still very early, but how have you how's that changed over time, would you say? How have you navigated those feelings of guilt?
Yeah. It still pops up from time to time. But I do feel as if I've come to a place where, it was something actually that my dad said to me a few months after Jack passed. And, it's a phrase I've now heard many times, but it's so simple. He said, if the roles were reversed and you were looking down on Jack, would you want him to feel guilty or would you want him to live? And that just kind of unlocked something in my brain, because of course I wouldn't want him to feel guilty. Of course I'd want him to go and live his life. And so I think from that moment on, something switched in me where I felt I now have two lives to live. Like I owe it to Jack to live a full and beautiful life. And so I think I've chosen to embrace that he is experiencing life through my eyes. I feel like he is such a part of me now. I carry him with me every day. So I think by shifting that perspective, it really helped. That being said, easier said than done. You know, there are still days and moments where the guilt returns. Particularly, you know, I've started dating again in the last year, and that's been a tricky, um, that's been tricky. It's been emotional and guilt ridden, but I'm doing my best, and you know, and I'm doing my best to hold on to that feeling that he would want me to keep living because I would want him to. So that's kind of how I've navigated it. But as I said, I'm not perfect, and I'm still, you know, still figuring it out.
Mhm. And I think that's such a big thing to touch upon, that you're still figuring it out, even though, it might look like you're moving forward and you've processed things and everything's, back to normal, dating again, working again. I think that's a big thing with grief, that we have to do those things, we have to go back to work, we have to move forward, but it's not that we're just fully healed. That's just how the world works. That's grief. We have to be able to move forward with it at some point, and it's not easy at all. And that guilt does come with it, especially with things like you say, dating, or you know traveling and doing things that they would have loved, but at the same time they still can love it through you, and you're carrying on their life essentially. And that's, I think, I haven't actually heard what you mentioned your dad told you, but I think that's a great way to look at it, because they would definitely, if the roles were reversed, they would love for you to keep living, and living for yourself, but also living for them at the same time. In regards to your relationship with Jack and things like that, what were some of the, obviously we know with loss we lose the person, but what were some of the smaller things, the everyday things that you don't really think about at the time, but you suddenly realized, oh, I can't do that anymore, I miss that sort of thing.
Right. Great question. You know, yeah, this is something that I think people who, you know, haven't experienced a loss don't understand how it's a million little losses every day, you know? And the first time you realize one is happening, it's like you're losing them all over again. And this is so specific and odd, but one thing that I remember making me very sad early on, once I went back to our apartment that we shared and slept there the first night, um, I remembered something. So Jack used to always kick his socks off in the middle of the night, and they'd be sitting on the bottom on the floor next to our bed. And he wouldn't pick them up. And I used to get so annoyed at him every day. I'd be like, put your socks in the hamper, right? And that morning, I just remember thinking, God, I used to be so annoyed by those socks on the floor, and now I would give anything to see those socks on the floor, you know?
Mhm.
So that was, you know, a little dumb specific thing, but it gave me, that was the beginning, I think, of me understanding this new perspective of what matters in life. You know, why did I care so much that his socks were on the floor? Like, why did I get mad at him about something so dumb? So the socks were a big thing, but I think, you know, I just missed having my person on Sundays were really hard. Sundays were the day where we usually didn't leave the apartment. Sundays were kind of our day that we spent together and kind of had a lazy day. We'd watch TV, we'd order in food usually. So I found Sundays to be very hard at the beginning because they were the days where I missed him the most because they were days
Mhm.
that we always spent together. Um, and then I think living in New York, you know, we would go out a lot. We'd, you know, pop out for dinner or, you know, we'd make spontaneous plans. Um, and I think one thing that I realized early on was I couldn't be spontaneous anymore. If I wanted to go out to dinner with a friend, I had to schedule it and make the plan. I didn't have my person anymore who I could just say, "Hey, you want to go do this?" So losing I lost my fiance, but I lost my best friend, so there's a million ways that loss manifested. Um, and I'm doing a bad job, I think, of describing it right now, but
Not at all. Not at all.
but those are just a few little ways.
Yeah. No, I think you definitely didn't do a bad job at describing it. I think it was perfect. And I think people will definitely relate in regards to, the small things. It's always the small things. I think with grief, we always, assume that people are missing, massive big things about the person, but it's always just, oh, making a cup of tea for me, having that Sunday to watch the series, the little things is what we always remember and think about. It definitely does, like you said, changes your perspective. I said it many times on the podcast that it changes your perspective on a lot of things in life. You don't want to tolerate any small things or, miss the small things because you know that, it can be taken away. So you always just look at the bigger picture and think, okay, what can I take from this and how can I move forward with it? But no, you definitely didn't do a bad job, so don't worry about that. But in regards to, you touched on the apartment and things, and I saw you mentioned about a present and in regards to a pillow, and you still have that pillow. Would you be able to share a bit about that story if you'd like to?
Yes, absolutely. So Jack passed 2 weeks before my birthday. And when I returned to New York and was walking back to our apartment for the first time, it crossed my mind. I thought, oh, what if he had ordered me a gift? And, what if there's something there waiting for me? And I kind of laughed to myself after having the thought because as much as I love Jack, he was not a good planner, okay? And like and in the past like he would scramble to probably get me my gift last minute. That was just who he was. So I kind of laughed to myself, like, in what world would he have been so prepared that there's a gift waiting for me? And then I also thought we were, we were both men about the same size. We like wore the same size clothes. So I was like, even if he did order something, how would I know that it's a gift? Because it could have been something he was ordering for himself. So, anyways, I'm having all these thoughts because I'm spiraling and grieving, and I don't know. Anyways, I get back to my apartment building for the first time, and sure enough, there's a big box addressed to Jack. And so I'm like, oh my God, don't get your hopes up, Jack. Don't get your hopes up that this is going to be a gift. But then I opened the box, and it was a pillow with Barbara Streisand's face on it. And I'm a huge Barbara Streisand fan. And a few years prior, he had gotten me a wine glass with her face on it. So in that moment, I immediately knew, oh my gosh, this was a gift for me. And it was a pillow. It was something I could hold on to. So I hugged that pillow and I walked back into our home for the first time, and it was as if he was welcoming me back home. And it from that moment forward, I was kind of okay in our space. And I had been so nervous about going back there, and that day I thought I'm gonna go check on it, but I still might stay with my family for a few days. I wasn't planning to sleep there that night, but that pillow, it was the most comforting, beautiful. It felt like him welcoming me home. And from that moment on, I knew that that's where I needed to be, and being there made me feel closer to him. And so I'm so grateful that he plans in advance and ordered that pillow. I still can't believe it, but it's my most prized possession. It sits on my bed, and it just makes me smile every time I see it.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I think the
Yeah.
things that we have still from the people that we've lost are things that we cherish because we know that it came from them or it was something that they wore. Like I always wear my dad's ring, so like it's something that you're able to, like you say, cherish. And people might think, "Oh, it's a pillow with Barbara Streisand's face on it. Like, why is that so important to you?" But like for you, I think it's important for people to hear like what. Yeah, it's a pillow, okay, but what does that pillow, represent for you now, would you say?
Um, it represents his love for me.
Mm,
I look at that pillow and I remember that I remember how much he loved me. And yeah, it's like a physical manifestation of his love, I feel.
Yeah.
So that's what it means to me. And yeah, it can be, as you said, it can be something as silly as a Barbara Streisand pillow. For all of us, we all have those items that other people might not understand. And it's funny what you like after you lose someone, it's funny what things hold meaning. You
Hmm.
know, there was another thing. The last soap dispenser that he had like bought from the drugstore. There's one brand that we normally buy, okay? And it has kind of like a sleek, cool bottle. Like a few weeks before he passed, I we were out of soap and he said, "Oh, I'll grab some." And he bought this really dumb looking soap thing, like something I don't know. It was like a dumb bottle. It wasn't what we normally buy, and I remember being like a little annoyed because I'm like, "Why did you buy that one?" But now it's like I'm gonna hold on to that. It's been empty now for 3 years, but it reminds me of him, and it's so dumb. But like I love that soap dispenser now, and I'm always gonna hold on to it. So it's funny how just dumb things can hold so much meaning, just be a nice reminder of your person.
Yeah, 100%. It's the reminder of the love that you shared together. And just to confirm for any UK listeners, the drugstore is the pharmacy store, right? To confirm that.
Thank
But
you. Thank you.
yeah, I think it's so for people who don't understand it, the little things to us mean a lot. Whether it's a soap dispenser, a pillow, it's not the soap dispenser or pillow, it's the love that carries with it and the memories that you shared with those things. So I think it's so important for people to hear that. And just to touch upon it, and you touched upon it as well, you mentioned the word comfort. In terms of, I saw actually something that you posted about comfort and how things that comforted you maybe at the start of your journey change over time. What do you mean by that? Would you like to expand on that?
Absolutely. Well, actually, it kind of builds off what we were talking about with the apartment.
Mm,
So, for the first year and a half, I stayed in the apartment where we lived, and I felt like I needed to be there. It felt like I was closer to him, and it provided a lot of comfort. Then something shifted after about a year and a half where the apartment was no longer just filled with, my happy memories with him. Now it was filled with memories of a year of grieving him. So it started to lose its comfort. And I realized it no longer was making me happy being there. It no longer was providing comfort. And that's when I realized, okay, maybe it's time for me to move somewhere else. So, so the apartment was, I think, a good example of something that at the beginning I like loved being there, and then over time it shifted. And I think in terms of other things, there were days where I felt like I needed to be surrounded by people. Like the thing that was comforting me most was being with people and talking about him. And then there would be days where all I wanted was to sit alone and not talk to anyone and just try not to think about it. So it's funny how, these things that provide comfort can change over time, and every day is different when you're grieving. And what you need one day might be very different from what you need the next day. And I think that's what, makes it hard for people to support you through your grief. And it's why you need to be, vocal and tell your family or your friends what it is that you need, because it can change over time. And I think that was something that surprised me. And it was I just had to you have to learn to listen to yourself and check in with yourself and say, what do I need today? And what is bringing me comfort? And I think, the scariest thing in the world for me was leaving that apartment, but being able to check in with myself and say, you know what? This is no longer serving me. It's no longer providing comfort. And I need to make a change. That was such a hard decision, but it was the right one. And I don't regret it. But It was hard.
Mm.
So it's all hard.
Yeah, it is. It is all hard, and yeah, none of this is easy. Moving forward, moving out of an apartment, navigating it, talking to friends about it, none of it is easy. And although for some people it might look like it is, online when you're talking about things, the stuff behind the scenes is so difficult to navigate. But I think it's also so important what you just touched upon with the apartment in particular, because it shows people that something that you relied on so heavy at the start for comfort, and you thought, I could never potentially never live without this apartment, because if I move out of this, how am I'm going to be forgetting Jack. So it's like it shows people that over time, the things that you think you need forever will change, and the things that bring you comfort will change, and you can move forward even if you thought that I can't live without that. And I think that's so important in grief, because it shows that yeah, over time grief does change, your feelings change, and as you mentioned, checking in with yourself and where you're at on your journey is such an important thing, because you'll notice that things might have changed, and things that you do need, or you know at this point need now, will have changed for sure. So I think that's so important. In regards to just going back to friends and potentially family as well, for myself, I was very young when I lost my dad, so people didn't, like you say, don't really know how to react or what to say. From someone who posts online to thousands of strangers, I heard a question yesterday, and it was, did you feel more comfortable talking about your grief to strangers than you did to your close friends?
Yes, I did. And I know that that sounds insane, but I find myself some days, recording this video to the strangers on the internet, saying things that I've never said to my mother or to my best friend. And it's odd, right? But it's easier, I think, to say these things to strangers than it is to the people we love the most. And it's one of the reasons I think that I turned to TikTok. Um, it had been 2 years since Jack had passed, and I think people were checking in a little less. And then also when people would check in, and my mom hates when I say this, but it's the truth. When she would call me and ask how I was doing, I was afraid to be honest. If I was afraid to tell her if I was having a bad day because I knew it would ruin her day, and I
Yeah.
didn't want to upset her.
Mhm.
So I found myself holding so much of it in. And TikTok gave me a place where I could let it all out and kind of dump it on strangers. And, and when I started, it was a very small following, and I didn't think my friends and family would ever see what I was saying. I never expected for it to end up having the reach and for them to all discover it. But one of the best things that has come from this, I will say, is I feel as if it reopened a dialogue with my family and friends. And I'm fortunate that they all now follow along and will watch my video and text me after and say, "Oh, I saw your video today. It reminded me of this, or I related to it in this way." So I think one of the biggest blessings has been how it's opened a new dialogue with the people I do care about, that are in my, not that I don't care about the people on the internet, I care about them too, but I mean the people that I actually know in real life. So it's funny, right? How it's easier to say it to strangers. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
And I think it's because we know that strangers online will have been going through similar things to ourselves, so we think that they'll get it. But also the people around us might have been through things as well. But it's just the fact that when you're posting to strangers, you're like, look, they're not gonna come back to me with something that might not help me on my grief, or they might not understand it. These people will get it. So I think that's when it's talking about posting to strangers compared to people that you're close with, the strangers more often than not will have actually understood what you've been through a little bit more, just because they might have experienced it themselves as well. But yeah, just touching upon that then. So obviously, like you said, and myself as well, still navigating this journey. No, by no means an expert in grief at all. But what would you say to someone who potentially, doesn't post online? Not everyone wants to post on social media about their grief. So they might not have the opportunity for their friends or family to see that they are feeling this type of way or feeling these feelings. How do you reckon that we can navigate that then, in terms of, with our friends, letting them know how we actually are feeling, or, how can we go about that?
Great question. And I think this is easier said than done for most people, but I think you have to advocate for yourself and you have to speak up. I think so many of us are afraid to tell people what it is we truly need from them.
Hmm.
And yet what I found in the moments when I would say to a friend, "Hey, I want to talk about Jack," or "I'm having a bad day. I need this." Anytime I told someone what it was that I wanted, I felt a sense of relief in them because the people that care about you want to support you, and most of them just don't know how. So, by speaking up and telling them what it is you need, you're helping them too because they love you, they care
Yeah.
about you, they want to do what you need. So I think by opening a dialogue and speaking up and just telling people and simply what it is you need, I think it helps you and it helps them. Um, that being said, I know that can be scary,
Hmm.
and something that I think as men, it's harder for men to talk about emotions, and it's a reason why I love your page and what you're doing. So I think what I have found is sharing your emotions, saying what you need. I think that is the strongest thing in the world. It's
Hmm.
not weak to say, "I need help." I think it's so powerful, particularly as a man, to say, "I'm hurting and I need help." So I think it's a beautiful thing to share your feelings and just speak to your friends and be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree completely. And like you said at the start, I think that's the biggest point to touch upon, that it's by no means easy at all to do it and to speak to your friends about it. In regards to the male side of things, of course, growing up, we haven't really been taught how to talk about our emotions. We've been taught that, speaking or crying about things like that is weak. And, like you said, and we've touched upon it many times on this podcast, it is one of the strongest and most powerful things you can do to talk about your grief and your emotions. And I think as well that, I've heard it a couple times recently as well, we do feel like talking about our grief can, maybe bring a downer on the mood or burden people, things like that. But like you said, and I think that's the biggest thing, those people, and you find it out through grief, those people who do genuinely care about you would absolutely love to hear about how you're feeling. They'd love to hear about your person when you want to talk about them, and it's just something that you'll navigate through your grief journey. But 100%, if you can and do feel ready to, just telling people, the people that you really trust, how you feel can be such a weight off your shoulders in your grief, and they'll do their best to support you 100% if they care. So, great piece of advice. And for people listening, it is not easy, but it is definitely something that can help you on your journey for sure. Just going back to the physical objects or the things that, keep memories alive, I absolutely love your bench chats. Would you be able to just talk about, the how it all works, the bench itself, because I know there's meaning behind that as well, and what sort of made you want to start doing that type of series?
Great, thank you. So I proposed to Jack with a bench in Hudson River Park here in New York City. And after he passed away, um, I was the thought of returning to that bench was very hard because I thought it was a place that we would go back to together for the rest of our lives and reminisce on the night we got engaged. And it was a park where we both walked every day. It was a daily habit to take a walk there. So I wasn't sure how I'd return to the bench. It seemed too overwhelming. And then something beautiful happened after he passed, and friends of mine started sending photos of them at the bench and leaving flowers at the bench. And it kind of became this place where people in his life were going to memorialize him. And so that inspired me to go back to the bench. And when I went back, it ended up similar to returning to the apartment. I found so much comfort in it. So I started going to the bench every day. I try to pay a visit every day when I am here in the city, usually in the morning with my coffee, and kind of it became my place to go and make time for my grief and think about Jack. So that's kind of how the bench began. And then I started sharing about the bench online. And then I had the idea of filming at the bench and inviting some friends and family who are also grieving to come sit with me on Jack's bench and share the person that they're grieving and just have a honest talk similar to what we're doing right now, just about grief. So I've really loved doing it, and I'm hoping to do more of those chats in the new year. Um, because every what I have found is everyone is grieving. It might not be your partner, it might not be your father, but everyone's grieving something, and grief can manifest in so many different ways. And so that's what I'd like to shed a light on from the bench moving forward, just to show people, there's so many different types of grief. And I wanted to, similar to how you're using your platform in this podcast to share other people's stories, I wanted to, people know my story now. I want people to be able to share theirs because I know how comforting and beautiful it's
Mhm.
felt to be able to share Jack with other people. So I hope to be able to give other people that chance. So yeah, so that's kind of how it began and how it got started.
No, it's brilliant, and I love the idea behind it. Like you said, there's so many different types of grief as well, which is obviously something that we don't often think about. Is that you can grieve a person, you can grieve a job, you can grieve a pet, you can grieve so many different things, and a lot of people, which again ties back to the talking and the mental health side of things, that a lot of people are going through things and don't necessarily feel like they have the opportunity to talk about them. So that idea behind it and just letting other people, do like what we're doing now, just talk about their story, talk about how they're feeling, sharing that, I can imagine provides so much comfort to them as well. What's some of the most surprising things that you've noticed about the bench and the talks that you've had? How have people sort of opened up and feel like do they? Is it must be so beautiful to see people just share their stories at a place so meaningful to you.
Absolutely. And up till this point, all the guests I've had on the bench have been either family members or friends of mine. And I think the most beautiful thing about that is, I'll have my best friend sitting on the bench, and she'll say something I never knew about her loss, about, navigating grief. And I think, yeah, what's been eye-opening about the experience is you just never know what someone else is carrying. And it can be, someone that you truly feel close, so close to, and yet how many times in life do you actually sit down and talk about this kind of stuff? Here's a friend I'd known for 10, 15 years, but we've never really had an honest talk about she lost her father at a young age, and I had never really asked her about it because until I went through, my loss, it just wasn't on my radar. I was living in my own world. And so I had never taken the time to ask her what it was like to lose her dad, when she was in middle school. And so I think, yeah, one of the biggest blessings of all of this is this new awareness that I feel like I have now, um, just to how everyone is hurting and grieving, and it's brought me closer to that friend. So yeah, so I think just I've learned so much about people that I thought I knew everything about. So that's been a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, I can imagine it is, and like you say, hearing things that your friends you haven't heard before, and this is the first time,
Yeah.
must be so eye-opening and so beautiful to hear as well at the same time because it will bring you closer to them. And I think that's such a big thing to touch upon again, linking back to what we were talking about before. You know, you might think that people don't want to hear about your grief and that you're burdening people and that, it's too much for them. But a lot of the time, people might have their own issues that once you talk about your grief, they'd love to hear about and ask you about it even more. And they might even start sharing things with you as well, which can bring you even closer together and that connection even closer. So it's such an important thing, I think, that you're doing with the bench chats. And like I say, it's beautiful that where it started and how it began at that bench is even more meaningful. Um, I just wanted to go back to something that you touched upon in the point before as well. It was about the impact of grief and more towards the physical side, because I know that you've touched upon this as well, and I think it's a brilliant thing to touch upon in terms of the actual, yeah, of course, it impacts us emotionally massively, it impacts us mentally massively, but quite often we don't talk about the physical effects that it has, the brain fogs, the feeling tired, the feeling drains. What would you say, like, what do you remember most about how it impacted you physically, and how did you sort of navigate that as best as you could?
Right. So I think that was one of the most surprising things for me about grief was how physical it was, and how draining it was, and how exhausting it was, and how every day, just doing normal tasks, getting out of bed, taking a shower, things that I was used to doing every day now took so much more effort. Everything it felt like just everything took more out of me because what I found was in every moment you're actively grieving, so you're carrying this new weight with you and it weighs you down. So I found grief to just be completely exhausting, and it gave me a new um, respect and understanding for people who live with depression. I thankfully I've had a very blessed life up until this point, and I had never experienced depression, and I didn't understand how debilitating it can be. It was a struggle to get out of bed some days. And so the biggest surprise for me was the physical aspect. And even today, it's been 3 years and I've learned, how to carry that grief and how to balance it. But I do feel that it still weighs on me tremendously, and certain things do still take more effort. And the way that I have handled that is giving myself time to rest, giving myself time for myself to recharge, because it can be just everything in life can be can be draining. And I think I was someone who was always on the go, always moving, and now I've given myself permission to slow down and just live in the moment more
Mhm.
and rest
Yeah.
and to not feel guilty for taking time by myself and taking time, to heal and recharge.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's one thing that, doesn't really get mentioned that much, and I didn't really know about it until more recently as well, was the physical impact that it does have on you and how draining it can be. And I think people hearing that and knowing that, if you do feel like little tasks that to other people would seem little are very hard and very difficult, that is part of grief. And it's not, weird that, making a meal takes you much longer or feels like a lot more effort than it did before. The physical impacts of grief are so profound, and it's such an important thing to touch upon. And in regards to that, then, what would you say is one of the most important things that helped you, or tools that helped you to navigate that physical feeling of grief?
Um, I think what was most helpful, honestly, was checking in with myself each day and kind of asking myself, what can I handle today? What am I capable of? And making sure I wasn't overcommitting myself, making sure that I was giving myself time to recharge. I think in the early days, I felt as if I needed to be surrounded by people at all times. And so I was kind of trying to book myself out like every night that I'd have a friend who could be with me um, those first few months. But then I hit a point where if every night I was sitting with a different friend, or if I was sitting with someone and having to talk about my day and talk about how I was feeling, that took effort and that started to become draining. So then I realized, okay, wait, I actually need to be alone and I need to make time for myself to recharge. So I think just giving myself grace and giving myself permission to say no to things and and just take time for myself. That was, I think, hard for me to learn. And because I've always enjoyed being a social person. I like being on the go. I like being with people, but learning that sometimes it's okay to say no to something and it's okay to make time for yourself. I think that was hard for me at the beginning, and now it's my favorite thing in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, I relate a lot to that. I think before grief, I would say yes to everything, feel like I'm missing out on things, or, like I didn't want to say no because I really wanted to be there. But then, obviously, through loss and through grief, the physical impacts that it has, you just don't have the energy and the facilities to be able to just show up to everything like you could before. And I think that's so important that, you say about the checking in with yourself and just thinking, look, I am going through something very tough here. It is taking physical tolls on my body. Do I need to go to this or should I do this instead? Is going for a walk instead of going to this event going to help me a bit more? Just checking in with yourself and think, what is actually going to help me to process this and work on this physical impacts that it has. So yeah, just taking time and knowing that, if you do have a heavy day, taking a step back, resting and recharging, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that because what you're going through is having a lot of a physical toll as well. So thank you. No, thank you so much for that, Jack. I think that's a really useful perspective on that side of things because I know a lot of people, run, do this, do that, to manage it, to manage the physical impacts. But sometimes just taking a step back is one of the best things that you can do. Just going back to the love side of things and the dating side of things. So with myself, it's slightly different. Like we touched upon, there's different types of grief, different types of loss, and I also have feelings, when it comes to dating, when it comes to love, where you think, oh, it's a bit scary. What if something happens, this and that. How have you found dating, and what's, one thing that grief has taught you about love, would you say?
Well, I think I've dating's been hard. Um, as it was at the beginning. It was hard at the beginning because I didn't know when I would meet someone if I could should share my story or not. And so like I found, the first date I went on, I didn't mention it. But then I felt like I was sitting there the whole night and he's asking me all these questions about myself and I was kind of lying by omission, by not mentioning Jack. Um, I was, so then I just felt dumb at the end of the night because I'm like, I just sat there and like lied to this guy all night. So then I thought, okay, the next date I'll mention it if it comes up naturally. And it did, and it went fine. But so that was the hardest thing to navigate at the beginning. Now that that's less on my mind, I'm less afraid of it. I know how to talk about it. Um, but so what grief has taught me about love? That is such a great question because what it's taught me is, love is everything. I was so lucky to be loved by Jack and to have that feeling of safety and protection. I had someone that I would do anything for and who would do anything for me. And I think I didn't understand at the time how lucky I was and what a beautiful thing that is to, to say to someone, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Like, I think that is the most beautiful thing anyone can say to another person. And it's so rare to find love. So I have a new appreciation for love and a new understanding of how important it is because I I miss having that in my daily life. And it's made, even though dating is scary, it's like I know it's worth fighting through that to find again. Love is worth it. So yeah, so I'm at a point now where it's like I want to find love again. I'm hopeful that I will. I believe I will. But I also know what real love is, so I'm not gonna settle for less. And so I've and the other thing is, I now know the cost of love. I know the risk that it is, giving yourself fully to another person
Hmm.
and then losing them. Love can hurt and it was, the worst thing that ever happened to me. And yet I still believe that love is worth it. And I still, hope to love again. So I think grief is love. It's the reason it's so painful is because our love was so deep. So it's taught me so much about love, and it's taught me that it's worth it.
Yeah. And I think that's so beautiful because I think it, like you touched upon at the end, like how lucky we were to have loved someone so much that the pain of grief is still happening to us 3, 4 years later on. That's just proof of how strong the love actually was for the person that you've lost if you're still feeling it years later, as a lot of us do. And I think a lot of the things that you touched upon was so important as well, like even the first bit where you said about I didn't tell the person that I went on a date with about Jack. And I think that's such an important thing for people to hear who are potentially looking to date again after whether they've lost a parent, a sibling, or a partner. I think it's such an important thing to think about because you don't owe anyone your story, although it might feel like you do. But you also might feel like you want to tell someone your story so that, at the start you can just be open. Look, this is what I've been through, and whether they accept that or feel like they can help you with that is a different story. So it's such an important thing to touch upon, I think, the dating side of things after grief, because it is something that you're not sure how much to share about what you've been through. And I think that a lot of people will relate to that. And I think there's no wrong or right way to go about it. Whatever feels right to you, by all means, go for that. But I also think that what you touched upon with the hope side of things is so important for people to hear because, although what you've been through is so difficult and the love that you shared was so, like I say, so much, the fact that you've still got hope is such a big thing for people to hear. And even dating again, like that's so it's such an interesting thing that you're able to do that again. So it's a credit to how you've processed the grief journey and that side of things. Um, Honestly, Jack, thank you so much for what you've shared so far. I've absolutely loved hearing your perspectives in even more detail. I know that when you talk on TikTok and Instagram and things like that, there's only so much you can share. But hearing your perspectives and expanding on those, I think will have helped so many people, in particular those navigating the loss of a partner. And just on that, I always like to close with a final question and just say, in this case, we're talking a lot about partner loss. If someone listening has just lost their partner, what's one thing that you'd really want them to know?
I want them to know that they'll be okay. Um, when I lost Jack, I couldn't imagine ever ever getting over it, and not that I've gotten over it. I never thought I would be okay again. I lost my other half, and I couldn't imagine a world where I was able to start living my life again without him. And here I am 3 years later, and the grief is still there, but I'm able to carry it, and in a way I never imagined. So when it feels as if your life is over, your future's been ripped away, just know that you are stronger than you think, and you can survive this. I think that's my message.
I think it's a beautiful message to finish with, and I think that, yeah, 100%. As much as at points we can feel like, how can we even move forward again? Like you said, it never fully goes away, but you can carry it and move forward with that grief alongside. So thank you again so much, Jack, for joining me today, and thank you again for all the perspectives that you shared today and what you do online as well. And for people who don't follow yourself and would love to follow you, I'm sure people will after what you've shared today. Where can they find yourself?
You can find me on TikTok and Instagram. My handle is my name on both, Jack Ciapciak. And thank you, Luke. I really enjoyed this conversation. And as I said, I love the work that you're doing. I'm so inspired by it. And just thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you again, Jack. Really appreciate you. And we'll see you on the next episode of Too Young to Grieve.